The clock in the church tower struck 5:30 in the morning when Dona Rosa, in her early 70s, her skin scarred by the sun and time, slipped out of bed. The mattress, though simple, was her only refuge from a day that promised to be long and repetitive. The smell of fresh coffee already wafted through the small kitchen of her humble home, a daily ritual that preceded the journey to the Albuquerque mansion. On that cool autumn morning, while the sun was still hesitant to break the horizon, Dona Rosa donned her impeccable uniform, a starched white apron over a cotton dress, and tied a scarf around her head, covering her gray hair. Every movement was calculated, the result of decades of a routine that had become part of her very essence. Her nimble fingers prepared breakfast for her grandchildren who were still sleeping, dreaming of a world she could barely imagine. The Albuquerque mansion, a mansion with imposing architecture and meticulously manicured gardens, was her second home, or perhaps her first battlefield. There, amid crystal chandeliers and marble floors, Dona Rosa spent most of her days cleaning, cooking, and organizing the lives of a family living in a parallel universe to her own. Mrs. Albuquerque, always elegant and distant, barely noticed her except to give instructions or remark on the dust that insisted on accumulating in the most remote corners as she scrubbed the floor of her employer's kitchen. The scent of cleaning products invading her nostrils, Dona Rosa's mind wandered. She saw the smiles of her grandchildren, the concern in her daughter's eyes, the bills piling up on the kitchen table. Physical exhaustion was a constant, a dull ache that accompanied her from dawn to dusk. But there was something stronger that kept her going. An unconditional love for her family and a dream that, though it seemed distant, burned in her heart like a coal. She dreamed of seeing her grandchildren studying in good schools, of having a home where laughter was louder than the sound of the broom, of being able to care for her daughter without the anguish of loss. It was a simple dream, yet grandiose for someone living on the margins of others' opulence. One day, she promised herself, this silent routine would be broken. One day, she would build a future where her family could live with dignity and joy, far from the shadows of the Albuquerque mansion. And this promise was her strength, her hope, her driving force for another day. It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon that Dona Rosa's dream, once a dormant ember, ignited into a living flame. Her youngest grandson, Pedrinho, an 8-year-old boy with curious eyes and a smile that lit up her world, arrived home with the news that the school required new teaching materials, too expensive for the family's tight budget. Dona Rosa's daughter, Anna, sat at the kitchen table, her face weary and her hands covering her eyes, silent tears streaming through her fingers. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom," she whispered, her voice choked with hopelessness. At that moment, something snapped inside Dona Rosa. It wasn't just the pain of seeing her daughter suffer, but the acute realization that the silent routine was no longer sustainable. She could no longer be content with simply surviving. She needed to act, to fight for a different future for Pedrinho and her entire family. The image of Pedrinho's face, once so cheerful, now clouded with worry, was the catalyst she needed. That night, as the wind howled outside and the rain beat against the window, Dona Rosa couldn't sleep. Instead of giving in to despair, her mind began to work. She reviewed her skills, her years of experience. Cooking, sewing, tending plants. Everything she did for the Albuquerques, she did masterfully. Wasn't there a way to transform these skills into something more, something her own? The next day, during lunch at the mansion, while serving Mrs. Albuquerque and her friends, Dona Rosa overheard talk about a new cafe that had opened in the neighborhood, famous for its homemade cakes. An idea, small and fragile like a seed, began to germinate in her mind. She was always praised for her cakes and sweets, especially the cornmeal and guava cake, an old recipe from her grandmother. Could she sell her cakes? With her heart pounding, Dona Rosa began to observe. She noticed that the neighborhood street market had a small space for artisans and delicacies. She spoke with a neighbor who sold spices, asking about the costs and bureaucracy. There was skepticism, of course. "Dona Rosa, you're already old enough to rest, not to start a business," a friend said. But Pedrinho's look, the hope in his eyes when she told him about the idea, was stronger than any doubt. Anna, her daughter, although worried about her mother's extra effort, offered her support. "If you believe, Mom, I'll help however I can." This support, albeit hesitant, was a balm for Dona Rosa. She knew the path would be arduous, but the flame of her dream, now lit, drove her forward. The first steps would be small, but each one would take her a little further away from the silent routine and bring her closer to the future she so desired for her family. With the flame of her dream lit, Dona Rosa dove into her new venture with the same dedication she had shown at the Albuquerque house. Nights, previously filled with brief, restful sleep, were now dedicated to experimenting with recipes, calculating costs, and planning the next steps. Cornmeal and guava cake, cheese bread, and tapioca starch cookies, previously made only for the family, became the stars of her small business. The first few days were, as expected, full of challenges. Time was her cruelest enemy. Juggling long hours at the mansion with making the delicacies meant less sleep and more fatigue. Her hands, already calloused from housework, now felt the weight of the dough and the heat of the oven for longer. Furthermore, the initial investment, though small, represented a significant portion of her savings, and the fear of failure was a constant shadow. Her first attempt at selling at the street market was a mixture of hope and frustration. She set up her small stall with the help of Ana and Padrinho, who, with the innocence of their youth, shouted, "Look at Grandma's cake, the best in the world." But business was slow, and many passed by without even glancing at her wares. Prejudice was also present. Some customers, accustomed to the image of Dona Rosa as a maid, looked askance at the black woman selling her delicacies. "Isn't that the Albuquerque's cleaning lady?" she heard a whisper, which struck her like a pang. However, Dona Rosa didn't let herself be discouraged. With each no, she remembered Padrinho's face and the promise she had made to herself. And, amidst the difficulties, small victories emerged that nourished her soul. A woman, attracted by the smell of cornmeal cake, bought a slice and, upon tasting it, her eyes widened. "How delicious! Where did you learn to make that?" That sincere compliment, coming from a stranger, was worth more than any initial profit. The other day, a young couple new to the neighborhood stopped by her stall. They didn't know Dona Rosa from her work at the mansion and, without prejudice, were enchanted by the simplicity and authentic flavor of her products. They became her first loyal customers, spreading the word about Dona Rosa's delicacies. At the mansion, Mrs. Albuquerque began to notice Dona Rosa's growing fatigue. "Is everything okay, Rosa? You seem a little distracted lately," she asked, her tone not one of concern but of demand. The pressure was mounting, and Dona Rosa knew she couldn't keep up the pace for much longer. The needs of her family, especially Padrinho's education, were a heavy burden, but also the driving force that drove her to find a solution. Each small success, each satisfied customer, was a step toward the freedom she so longed for, a sign that, despite the obstacles, her dream was possible. Fate sometimes weaves its threads in unexpected ways. It was during one of her trips to the market, while selling her delicacies, that Dona Rosa heard about a microcredit program for small entrepreneurs in the community. A neighbor, Dona Lucia, who sold herbs and spices next door, noticed Dona Rosa's hard work and the quality of her products and encouraged her to look into the program. "It's a chance, Rosa, for you to get a little boost to really grow your business." The idea of borrowing money scared Dona Rosa. Her whole life, she had made do with what little she had, and debt was a word that carried a heavy weight. However, the image of Padrinho, who now spoke enthusiastically about the books he wanted to buy for school, and the hope in Anna's eyes, who helped her on the production nights, spurred her to take the plunge. She decided it was time to take the risk. The process was not easy. Dona Rosa, with her limited education, needed Anna's help filling out forms and navigating the bureaucracy. Meetings with the program consultants were challenging, but she spoke from the heart, describing her dream and the quality of her products. The passion and determination in her voice, combined with the unmistakable flavor of a sample of her cornmeal and guava cake she brought, convinced the evaluators. The microloan was approved. With the money in hand, Dona Rosa invested in a larger oven, more efficient kitchen appliances, and more attractive packaging for her products. She also managed to rent a small space at the market, a little more visible and with a roof for rainy days. The sacrifices, however, increased. Sleep hours decreased even further, and fatigue was a constant presence. She continued to work at the Albuquerque house, as the steady income was still essential for the family, but every free minute was dedicated to her own business. Growth was not explosive, but steady and organic. The aroma of her cakes and breads began to attract more people. Loyal customers brought new ones. Dona Rosa, previously a silent and almost invisible figure in the mansion, was now the Dona Rosa of the treats, a woman with a different sparkle in her eyes. She began to see that her dream was not just a distant fantasy, but a reality she was building with her own hands, brick by brick, cake by cake. Her self-confidence grew with each compliment, each sale, each satisfied smile from her customers. The future, previously a haze, began to take on clearer and more promising contours. Dona Rosa's small investment in microcredit blossomed like a seed planted in fertile soil. The larger oven and modern appliances streamlined production, allowing her to meet growing demand. The permanent space at the market, with its canopy and a small handmade sign that read Dona Rosa's Treats, Taste of Home, became a landmark for lovers of homemade sweets and savory treats. The smell of cornmeal cake, cheese bread, and cornbread wafted through the air, attracting customers from all over the neighborhood. Success, though gradual, was undeniable. Sales increased weekly, and the extra income began to transform her family's life. Padrinho, with his new books and impeccable school uniform, went to school with an even wider smile. Anna, seeing her mother more fulfilled and the household less cluttered, dedicated herself wholeheartedly to helping with production and sales, taking on responsibilities and learning about the business. The family, once united by necessity, was now united by purpose and the joy of building something together. However, the growth of the business brought with it a dilemma. The hours dedicated to quit-utes de Dona Rosa increasingly clashed with the demands of the Albuquerque mansion. Mrs. Albuquerque, who had previously only noticed Dona Rosa's fatigue, now expressed irritation at her distraction and occasional delays. "Rosa, I need you to focus on your work here. My house can't wait," she said one day, her tone revealing hierarchy and expectation. Dona Rosa knew the moment of decision was approaching. The security of the Albuquerque's steady salary was a safe haven that had sustained her for decades, but the freedom and fulfillment she found in her own business were incomparable. She spoke to Anna, who encouraged her. "Mom, you built this with your own hands. This is your chance to have your own life, to not depend on anyone." With a heavy heart but a determined mind, Dona Rosa scheduled a meeting with Mrs. Albuquerque. It was a sunny morning, and the mansion seemed even more grand and imposing. In a firm but respectful voice, she announced her decision to leave her job. Mrs. Albuquerque, surprised and visibly upset, tried to dissuade her, offering a raise and better conditions. But Dona Rosa, with the dignity she always possessed, explained that her path was now different, that her dream was greater than any salary. Leaving the mansion that day, Dona Rosa felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was leaving behind a long and challenging chapter in her life, but opening the doors to an uncertain yet promising future. The harvest of her efforts was just beginning, and she knew that with her family by her side, she was ready to face whatever came. Leaving the Albuquerque mansion was a milestone, a turning point in Dona Rosa's life. As she closed the wrought iron gate for the last time, she felt not bitterness, but a profound sense of relief and gratitude. Gratitude for the years of work that allowed her to support her family, and relief at finally being able to dedicate herself entirely to her own dream. That day marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new and promising chapter. With her job gone, Dona Rosa was able to channel all her energy and passion into quit-utes de Dona Rosa. The small business, previously a nighttime and weekend activity, became her main occupation. She expanded the variety of products, introducing new flavors and fulfilling orders for parties and events. The quality of her delicacies, her attention to detail, and the care with which she prepared each item earned her a loyal and ever-growing clientele. Anna, her daughter, became her right-hand woman, handling administrative tasks, social media, and delivery logistics. Padrinho, now a teenager, helped with the fairs and promotions, proud of his grandmother's business. Dona Rosa's house, once a place of quiet worries, filled with laughter, the smell of baking cakes, and the vibrant energy of a family working together toward a common goal. Money, once scarce, began to flow, allowing Dona Rosa to renovate her home, provide Padrinho's education, and provide a more dignified life for everyone. The community, which had previously seen her only as the Albuquerque's maid, now recognized her as a successful entrepreneur, an example of resilience and determination. Her story spread, inspiring others to pursue their own dreams. Dona Rosa, with her wisdom and humility, became a respected figure, a matriarch who, with her own hands, built a legacy of flavor and resilience. Every cake sold, every compliment received, was confirmation that she had made the right choice. The freedom she felt wasn't just financial, but a freedom of spirit, of being the master of her own time and destiny. She was no longer the shadow in someone else's mansion, but the light guiding her own family to a brighter future. That was the beginning of everything, proof that faith and hard work could indeed turn dreams into reality. Years have passed since Dona Rosa traded her maid's apron for that of an entrepreneur. The small stall at the market gave way to a charming bakery and confectionery in the heart of the neighborhood, affectionately named Taste of Grandma Rosa. The aroma of fresh bread and homemade sweets beckoned everyone who passed by, and the place became a meeting place, a haven of flavors and stories. Dona Rosa, though still active and present at the bakery, now enjoyed a more peaceful life. Her hair, previously only gray, was completely white, framing a face that bore the marks of time, but also the serenity of someone who had found peace. She spent her mornings at the bakery, overseeing production, chatting with customers, and occasionally preparing one of her specialty cakes. With the same passion as always, her once humble home had been renovated and expanded, becoming a welcoming and vibrant home. The laughter of her great-grandchildren echoed through the rooms, filling every corner with joy. Padrinho, now a young university student, was studying engineering, a dream made possible only by his grandmother's tireless efforts. Ana, her daughter, masterfully managed the bakery, expanding the business and ensuring that Dona Rosa's legacy continued to thrive. One late afternoon, sitting on the porch of her house, watching the sunset paint the sky with orange and purple hues, Dona Rosa reflected on her journey. The hardships, the sleepless nights, the fatigue, everything seemed distant, like memories from a past life. She remembered the Albuquerque mansion, the smell of wax, and the distant gazes. But the image that prevailed was the smell of baking cornmeal, the smiles of her grandchildren, and the sense of freedom that filled her heart. Her life was living proof that resilience, faith, and love for family could move mountains. She not only overcame adversity, but built an empire of affection and flavor, a legacy that would transcend generations. Dona Rosa, the elderly Black woman who once dreamed of escaping her silent routine, had achieved much more than a good and happy life. She had built a future, planted hope, and become a beacon for all who knew her. And in that moment, with her heart overflowing with gratitude, she knew that every sacrifice was worth it. Every step was a brick in the construction of her own happiness and the prosperity of her beloved family.